I think it's like no secret. The larger an organization is, there's the more bureaucracy, the more et cetera, the more layers there are, and that's just
Right.
kind of goes with everything. With that being the case, then I think the important part is making sure that as an organization, you are hiring people that are as diverse as you claim your mission is.
I'm Kian Alavi, and this is Built for Good. This show is for community builders, the ones leading missions that matter. We're here to help you move with more clarity and less guesswork. Real stories, hard-won lessons, data that challenges assumptions, and insights that accelerate decision-making. One of my favorite sayings is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Meaningful work does not have to mean going alone. Now let's build some good together.
Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to have Ajani Husbands on the show. Ajani is counsel at Build Up, Inc. and the Campbell Group. Ajani is a friend and also part of the Maslow community, and I thought it would be really good to hear from him, learn about his journey, and also see what he sees and hear what he's thinking about the future of this work, about building for good, about movement work. Ajani, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kian. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today.
Oh, thank you, man. Hey, so I gave a little bit of your background, but if you could just tell us your journey to this point and what brings you here.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I'll start at the beginning of my professional journey. No, actually, no, I'll start a little bit before that because it gives some context. I always think it's important to note for people that my family is from Barbados. So it's the easternmost Caribbean island that makes it the closest island geographically to the continent of Africa. And I bring that up because Barbados has a very important history in the slave trade and the movement of enslaved people. Barbados was very often the island that they first came to. And then just as an island itself, Barbados has a history of that's not really talked very much about, but a history of its own series of rebellions and resistance against slavery and enslavement. And so I bring all that up because my parents, my mother in particular, as immigrants from Barbados to the United States, there are certain things that were just instilled in me growing up. One of them just being, the importance of perseverance. Another being the importance of community, family, of just being part of something greater. I think it's always been instilled in me, taught to me that, whatever you're doing, you're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for so many others. So that's sort of the origin story. And I'll even say my name itself, Ajani, which my mother bestowed on me. It is a Yoruba name, which means he who overcomes the struggle. So just sort of all these pieces been lining up just in order to help, we'll say like as micro influencers. So professional journey. Undergrad, grad school, all that good stuff. I started out professionally as a U.S. diplomat. I was very fortunate to receive a scholarship, the Pickering Fellowship. I served overseas for my time as a U.S. diplomat, served in Eritrea, Haiti, Pakistan, South Sudan, all fantastic places where I really learned a lot. The main takeaways for me as part of that journey, one, I always sought to work very closely with community organizations, with different activists, with different community leaders, or at least to know what was happening in those areas. So I'll give you some examples. So in Eritrea, my first assignment, I was fortunate enough to manage a grant that was given to actually a Sudanese professor who was in exile in Eritrea. And he was running a series of workshops for grassroots leaders from Eastern and what was then Southern Sudan, who were bussed into Eritrea to learn just various strategies for political movement building, resistance, that sort of thing. And I got a chance to meet them and work with them a few times. And I want to tell this story because it's very important for later on. there was a time where I gave a guest lecture, if you will, on some of the movements in the United States historically. Specifically, I gave a lecture on the Montgomery bus boycotts. For the listeners unfamiliar, this was the boycott set off by Rosa Parks, famously refusing to give up her seat on the front of a segregated bus. It kicked off 13 months of continuous resistance, daily, just refusing the entire Montgomery community, refusing to use the bus system. And we could do a whole episode just on that because it's fantastic.
Right.
But the thing that was just fascinating after the lecture and just sort of like explaining the underlying message being that building a movement takes full cooperation and lots of time and so forth. One of the participants raised their hand and asked me. They said, "Hey, thank you so much. This is great. What do you do when you're having a movement, you're having a rally, and the government comes out and just pulls out guns on people and starts eliminating them?" And I didn't have an answer for that. And it was at that moment, you have to remember, I'm like 23, 24 at the time. I'm very young. It's that moment that I realized there's a lot more to trying to be part of movement building other than just sort of giving these little speeches or trying to impart bits of what I know. There also is involved really being present and listening and learning, and that there's going to be sort of unique situations and unique solutions across the board. So that's just one of the lessons that I carried with me throughout my time as a diplomat. So I spent about 7-ish years as a diplomat. And at a certain point, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I knew that I had sort of a limited amount of time just like mentally before, like if I didn't go try to be a lawyer now, I would never go do it. So I was fortunate enough to get another scholarship, went to NYU Law. And I realized like most cats, when they go to law school, they kind of know. They're like, oh, I want to be this kind of lawyer. I want to be public defender. Or I want to be a prosecutor. Or, I want to work in a big fancy law office. I had no clue. None.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I knew that I wanted to work with nonprofits in the sense of I wanted to find a more efficient way for nonprofits to be able to operate. And a lot of that just stems from, my time as a diplomat. I would see so many dedicated organizations, like really scrapping and working hard, but they'd have to spend an inordinate amount of time raising funds. Even before I started as a diplomat, I filmed a documentary in Mamelodi, which is a township in South Africa, in Pretoria. I filmed a documentary there, really just on the self-sufficiency of the local organizations there. But one thing that I noticed while filming, I would come and I would explain what we were doing, that, we're here to tell your story. And this was like, before social media. So like there was YouTube, but not a lot of like storytelling in this genre. But once they realized like, oh, he's American, he's foreign, you could see like this switch happening, and they would kind of go. A lot of them would go into the spiel about like, oh, we need money for this, we need money for that, and that's because there's been sort of this training of, in order to survive, like we need funds from foreign entities, from foreign organizations. But before that, they were just very proudly telling me all the fantastic things that they were doing, that they were able to fund and work towards, and so. Seeing that repeatedly and some other experiences that I had as a diplomat, one thing that I just really wanted to have a hand in is working alongside nonprofit organizations to figure out just a more efficient funding mechanism or just anything I could do that would be part of a structure that would streamline things so that a nonprofit, community organizers, et cetera, could focus more so on doing the actual work. Rather than having to take time and resources away to figure out financing. So that's what I went to law school knowing. I graduated, and I'll say, like, quite honestly, like along the way, someone mentioned like, oh, are you doing, I forget what it's called, but the thing where like you like apply for a summer internship at these big law firms.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I don't know, sure, why not? So I applied, and I did the whole interview slog, and I was like able to get some offers. Like, okay, great. This is money, this is experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I came out of law school, and I worked in some of these big law firms for about 4 years, doing a variety of things, but really just trying to get a handle on just experience,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of, large amounts of transactional work, contract, et cetera. One of the secrets is, when you come out of law school, you don't really come out knowing how to do law,
Yeah.
how to practice
Right.
law. You know
Right.
how to research, you know how to write, you know how to edit, but you don't know, how to put contracts together. You don't know,
Mm-hmm.
how to edit certain documents, those kinds of things. Along the way, I mean, I knew, I think even from day one that like this wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept my eye out for opportunities and was very fortunate to find my way to the Campbell Law Firm, which is
Mm-hmm.
where I'm at now. And I've been there about 3 years as both senior counsel and vice president of strategic planning.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, what the Campbell Law Firm does, it's actually 3 entities in one. So
Mm-hmm.
one, it is a law firm that provides in-house counsel and legal services to nonprofits and philanthropies.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, we say like brave nonprofits. So we look for organizations that are really putting themselves out there, that are trying something different, that are community oriented and so forth. We also act as an advisory firm. There's another wing called Build Up Advisory Group, where we provide advisory services to nonprofits and philanthropies as well. So say, for example, if you have an organization that knows that they need some restructuring, maybe they just got a large set of money and they're trying to figure out, well, how do we expand properly? How do we reorganize our board? What are our weak points? What are our strong points? The Build Up Advisory Group works with them on figuring that out. And then the third wing, and this is what you're familiar with, is Build Up Inc., where we act as a fiscal sponsor and capacity builder to women and BIPOC-led organizations, specifically ones that, again, are brave. So they're very community-oriented, community-focused.
That's a very long journey that brought you to here. No, it's good. It's good. So let me
and
just.
I left some pieces out too. Like
I
I'd started a nonprofit for a little bit. Like I actually have a rum company in South Africa.
Right.
Like there's pieces I left out.
Yeah, 1966 rum. Is that right?
Absolutely, 100%. That's the one.
We're gonna put a link in the podcast notes. Also, is the documentary that you made also on the internet?
It is. Yeah, it's still on YouTube. It's still on YouTube.
Yeah,
so
great.
We can put a link there. But just with the caveat, guys, this was like 20 years ago. It's
okay.
Not fancy. Like you're not going to see a blockbuster. You could see anything like it probably on TikTok today. So
right? Okay. Well, so your early days, you found your way to diplomatic work, and
right.
As an American, you're in other countries, other worlds, doing work and supporting movement building. Like here in the States, this is how we have built movements and how we have helped create this incredible country. You're sharing that there. And you're coming up against, the reality of, the power dynamic between those who have, you're an American in a space, and those who don't, right? And so that's frustrating or disheartening or, all the things that you feel like this is getting in the way here. We need to move this out of the way onto your career in law. And now literally working, behind the scenes to ensure that those who are building for good can do so. Let's talk about diplomatic service. Like, how did you get into diplomatic service? And indeed, you are still, out in the world on behalf of the United States.
Yes, my wife is also in the diplomatic service, the foreign service. That's actually how we met. We met in Pakistan, both serving as in cultural attaché roles. But just in terms of how I got into diplomatic work, so there is a fellowship program called the Pickering Thomas R. Pickering Fellowship. As a sophomore, in undergrad, a good friend of mine who was a senior at the time. He came up to me and said, "Hey, like I know you're interested in international relations. like you're real cool, all this stuff. Like you should check out this fellowship. He also had the fellowship. I had never heard of, the Foreign Service. I vaguely knew about diplomacy. And the reality is a lot of people from, I wouldn't even say just like immigrant backgrounds, just, minority backgrounds, people of color backgrounds are not quite familiar with the Foreign Service or diplomacy because it's just not part of our upbringing. What I did hear was like, hey, this will pay for the rest of my tuition, and like I can go to grad school, and that's covered. And like there's a job opportunity that lets me travel when I graduate. Like at the age of 19, this sounds fantastic. So I applied, and a good friend of mine, another Black student, Victor Marsh, also applied. We both got it. And that became like the entry point. So you start out with that, and then like as you're going through undergrad, they check in on you. There's certain summer programs that you take. They give you some training before you take the Foreign Service exam. Then like you take the exam, you go to grad school, and then after that, that fall, you start as a Foreign Service officer. It was a fantastic experience, and I'm very grateful. Because I think probably like without that fellowship, I probably would not have gone that route, and I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't be where I am today.
It's amazing how one passing conversation can change a life, right?
No, 100%.
I mean,
100%.
I think I have a similar one in terms of like why I know my wife, and it like literally revolves around a decision around an egg salad sandwich. I'll tell it another time, but like it's just amazing. It's amazing, right? Like these extraordinary stories and journeys can be so like influenced by just a moment in time. These are often, a step function moment, if you will. You don't even know it's happening, but all of a sudden, boom, a whole new world opens to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Clearly, you had a heart for this work. You're sure a young, adventurous human being. Know you want to get out there and know you want to see the world, but you have a heart for this work because you've stayed in this work. Bring us into your why a little bit, specifically across your journey.
So I think, again, a lot of it just stems from the values instilled in me by my mother, by my family, by my community. Even in undergrad, the people that I was around, very community conscious, very focused on. I mean, like, look, it's college, so of course we're having fun and all this good stuff. But also a lot of like, well, what are you doing as part of the community, and what is the community doing? So there's always been this attachment to to something greater, and I think that's just always been important to me. It's just working, receiving a paycheck, like, yeah, money is nice, but like it's never enough. So I think that's always been the driving force.
Let's jump ahead into Build Up Inc. and Campbell Law Firm or Law Group.
Law firm, the Campbell Law Firm. It's confusing because it's three companies, so everything is under the umbrella of Build Up Companies, but the three entities are the Campbell Law Firm, Build Up Advisory Group, and then Build Up Inc.
So it's 2025. Obviously, the world is rearranging itself. What do you see in law right now when it comes to nonprofits and the good work that folks are doing?
So what we're seeing right now, people, organizations, leaders, movement leaders, et cetera, really want to get the work done. And I think now more than ever, they see the importance of doing that work. So what they're looking for from their legal advisors, from their attorneys, et cetera, is how can we do our work? How can we do our work and be protected? And so a lot of this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about wanting to be involved in a way that helps to make it so that organizations and movement leaders, et cetera, can focus on doing the work. And so that's where I see the work at the Campbell Law Firm and Build Up Inc. and Build Up Advisory Group stepping in now. And so, it's a lot of looking at recent court decisions or executive orders or anything that might adjust or have some type of impact on the work that's being done, and then being able to proactively provide the type of advice that organizations would need. And I'll give you an example. I was working with one organization on formation, so helping them to become a 501c3. This is a group of formerly and currently incarcerated and convicted individuals, as well as their family members. So they focus very specifically on advocating for the rights of those individuals, formerly and currently convicted and incarcerated individuals. And it is led by a group of people who are, or mostly are, formerly and some currently incarcerated or convicted individuals. So they are deeply involved with the work. And during the formation process, we do a very sort of interactive process. So it's not so much like, hey, just like hand it over and we'll do it. It's also like, well, like, tell us more about what you're doing and like, what do you envision? You know, when we're putting the bylaws together, it's, you know, like, what are the special things that you need and all that. So there's a lot of back and forth. What I realized is that, you know, while we love working with each other, but these guys were just busy. So, you know, you set up a call and like maybe they can't show up, or then you set up another call, they can't show up, or, you know, all these kinds of things. And I realized like, look, this is a situation where they really are like on the ground doing the work, and we have to change the way that we're approaching things so that we can be more of an asset to them. And so, you know, I started approaching it as like, hey, listen, guys, I know y'all got a lot to do. So I went ahead and I drafted this because it sounds like this is more so meeting your needs. Can you just take a quick look at this? As opposed to like, you know, can you give me 5 bullets on this and that, you know? And they were just a lot more appreciative, because I think just that approach really helped to demonstrate that like we understand that the work that they're doing is important. You know, it's work that they uniquely are situated to do. And so I wanted to make sure that in my uniquely situated position that I can help them to do that work more efficiently.
This is brilliant because, you know, the thing about building for good or movement work is it doesn't stop and it doesn't wait and it doesn't like to do all of it can, but it doesn't like to do all the stuff that's not the task of the day. The task of the day is first, and all that other stuff comes second, sometimes in the evening and the weekends when you can catch up to it. I think that's one of the things that people don't necessarily get in this moment. Like there's a lot of fear and whatnot, but like the problems in our communities are the problems in our communities, right? And to go from pain to peace, you know, to go from suffering to solutions, it's arm in arm work. It's reaching for each other. It's not culturally divided. Often, most of the time, it's just right there together, right? These are human beings. Maybe some, you know, are looking to create a better path forward, whether they're incarcerated or past incarceration, right? This is a good thing for our world and for our communities, and they're doing it. I appreciate that you adjusted for that. So with the Campbell Law Firm, you're doing work in terms of supporting 501c3s come together efficiently and get out there and do the work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's similar to what we're doing with Build Up Inc., where, again, so for those not familiar with the fiscal sponsorship concept, think about it as you have an organization or an artist or a group of you know, movement builders, and again, they are doing the work. You're going to keep on hearing me say the phrase, but they are doing the work. They have a couple of options here. One, they could go and form their own 501c3 nonprofit, which is something a lot of organizations do. But what comes along with that is there's lots of paperwork, there's money, there's time, there's resources, all of that you have to be able to do. And a lot of organizations, just for a variety of reasons, are not set up to be able to manage that. You know, maybe they can do the formation part, but then the upkeep, that's where a lot of organizations make missteps. A fiscal sponsor comes in and says, hey, we have 501c3 status, so you can use that status and be considered part of our organization. That's like the basic part of it. But, you know, really what ends up happening is that the fiscal sponsor takes over the accounting part, the filing, anything that's, you know, the back of the house that's normally required. So it really does free up the organization, the artists, the movement builders to focus on the work that they do. That's the nuts and bolts of fiscal sponsorship. And for Build Up Inc., we dive a little bit further because we noticed a few things. One, we noticed that within organizations, or within the field of organizations, those that are led by women and or people of color are far less likely to receive funding and or resources, and far less likely to be connected and to have the things that they need. And then, beyond that, they are also more likely to be deeply involved in certain types of community work. And so
Right.
when we are thinking about how can we have the greatest impact as an organization, we're looking to the greatest, we don't say marginalized, we say invisibilized. So the greatest invisibilized communities. And so for Build Up Inc., that's why we focus very heavily on organizations that are led by women and or people of color. And not just that, but also looking very deeply on what is the work that you do, how do you do it? And then on top of that, we provide capacity building services. So we provide monthly check-ins to make sure, like, hey, are you on track? Are you raising funds the way that you thought you would? Do you have any special concerns, any grants you're applying for that you need help with? We have weekly office hour check-ins that they can apply for, that they can sign up for. We have an in-house library of resources that we're constantly adding to. We have workshops that we offer. That's so everything from, how do you build your advisory board? How do you engage in certain types of fundraising? Because Build Up Inc. is part of this 3-company system, there's also access to our legal assets and our advisory assets. So all of this becomes very important for organizations that are really starting and just need to focus on the work that they're doing, or need to focus more specifically on certain things, and it allows us to be able to help them.
Beautiful. The thing about fiscal sponsorship, it's a nonprofit that practices fiscal sponsorship, and the words fiscal sponsorship are like, doesn't really often make sense or make clear what's going on. But like, if your mission aligns with our mission and you're doing work that we want to do, that makes things better for our communities, let's work together, and let's form a relationship to work together. But more importantly, what you explained around Build Up, focus on women's issues and BIPOC issues, that's the depth and the experience and the domain and the understanding and the cultural competency. It's one thing to be able to efficiently run a back office, and that's becoming easier and easier, certainly, right? But it's another thing to say, we're going to steward, we're going to guide, we're going to support you, we're going to bring the resources around you to ensure that you're successful, because what you care about is what we care about, and this is work together. And that's also like really the future of this space. There will be large generalized nonprofits that have, lots of projects, if you will, fiscally sponsored projects. But truly, the movement is heading towards specialization of a subject area or work or movement area and supporting it. Let's talk about big philanthropy versus small philanthropy. I think, the thing about fiscal sponsorships or nonprofits that practice it, that's really a small philanthropy movement, right? It's like, these are problems in our communities. Let's get you started. Let's get you going. Let's support you. But big philanthropy is, under scrutiny, and rightfully so for many things. What do you feel in general from your view of this work about philanthropy, what's going on right now, and the future of it?
Yeah, no, all very hard-hitting questions. So, we're seeing a couple things. So last year, a colleague and myself, we were fortunate enough to attend the African Philanthropy Conference, which was held in Zimbabwe last year. And it was just a fantastic experience. I recommend it to anyone involved in the philanthropy sector, because the conference really focused on this concept of decolonizing philanthropy. And so, just in general, like, what does that mean? So looking at philanthropy, instead of it being a top-down situation, more of a collaborative approach, meaning that those who are the recipients of grant funds, the power just went out of my house. So I don't know if you can still hear me.
I could still hear you. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
You're in South Africa at the moment.
Yeah, we've actually got solar panels that are supposed to kick in, but then like it keeps shorting out the circuits. So if you give me just like 30 seconds, I got to run down and like flip the breakers.
Do it. Amazing. Ajani, going through it to be on the call, Ajani.
Sorry, you know what happens? They switched this over to solar, but one of the tech people was explaining, like, like, yes, you're on solar and it's supposed to switch automatically there if the
Yeah.
power goes out in the area, but
Yeah.
something, because it's winter, we have all these like heaters going in the house and it
Yeah.
overloads the breakers.
Yeah. Right.
Like, especially like in the evenings, if we're like cooking and like just got several things going, boop, it'll go out. The Wi-Fi typically stays on because I have like a separate battery for it.
Clearly. Yeah. Clearly. We were still connected the whole time.
Oh no, that's perfect. Yeah, then that battery is doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
So we left off at decolonizing philanthropy and top down to collaborative.
There we go. Yeah, one of the main themes at the conference was this idea of decolonizing philanthropy. So one of the principles being, instead of a top-down approach, it's more of this collaborative approach. Even one speaker talked about this idea of the terminology that you use, and just even the word recipients implies that someone has to receive, as opposed to someone who's collaborating. So just like a lot of really good thought process on that. So just bringing that back to your question of sort of like big philanthropy versus small philanthropy, I think there is definitely a desire and a drive to shift things in the philanthropic space to be more equitable and more collaborative, and that's where organizations like Build Up Inc. Come in to try and nudge the needle towards that. But we're seeing a lot of things along those lines, where organizations are working to be more focused on community efforts. I was at another conference where the question was, how do we more quickly get funds out to community organizations? One of the main speakers, this woman from from Memphis, she was very blunt and saying, like, there's a lot of talk about doing this, but you guys aren't doing it.
Just do it. Right.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah.
There's actually this video that she put together, like a little skit, educational skit explaining it, and just the idea. Actually, I want to talk about it a little bit because it was so good. This idea that Harriet Tubman comes into an organization asking for a grant to help further her work. And, it's Harriet Tubman who is more deserving of the funds. And the organization just like, so very typically is like, okay, well, do you have, is your organization a 501c3? Do you have 3 to 5 years of budgets?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have this, you have that? And she's like, I'm Harriet Tubman. I am leading people to freedom. I am actually doing the work. Like, what? Yeah. It's like, oh, well, you can send in an application during our application period. And so it's just like this very wonderful, incisive look at a lot of the barriers that organizations face. We try to chip away at some of those barriers. So one of the things that we do is we do not have a required minimum budget that a project has to have before coming over to us. And that's an important thing, because a lot of times if you have leaders, et cetera, who are coming together to do the work, they may not have money yet. They're literally just starting, or like they're funding it out of pocket. So they've not received grants yet. They are formulating a plan to get grants. And so we'll say, like, look, that doesn't matter. You, as long as the work you're doing seems like it's about to be groundbreaking, or that like you're super focused into it, that's fine. We do have instead what we call like an initial fee, which is a small, like a nominal sum, about $1,000, that acts as a down payment on funds to be paid later. But there's no minimum of like, well, you have to have $50,000, $100,000, or $1 million. We're more so focused on like, what are you doing and how are you doing it?
Right. Access. Let's get started. Yeah. I mean, also a nominal fee to have access to Ajani and the whole team to support you and get going. Like, that's a big deal.
Right.
The whole idea about philanthropy being collaborative, it's talked about so much, but, and in this moment where big philanthropy is under attack, and often it's rightfully so, but this is not a cultural thing. It's like almost like, philanthropeak and creating all this like academic work to like just get work done It's like this is just too much, right? These are folks in their communities trying to feed folks, trying to get folks housed, trying to make sure we put together a better community, a better society. And then there's these gatekeepers. And when we talk about big philanthropy, like they're also tarnishing small philanthropy, right? Because the majority of this work is small nonprofits doing the work, standing up new initiatives every day. And there's a handful that's up there with large, big philanthropy. And not to say big philanthropy is totally bad. There's a lot of good there. But that is not the work. They are folks that are taking funds and they have good intention to bring those funds to work that's needed and supporting it. And there's way too much process. Way too much process and way too much kind of politically charged stuff that goes on with that. Whereas the rest of us, we're just trying to get it done. We're just trying to serve the needs of our community at a neighbor level, sometimes at a city level, sometimes at a regional level. From BuildUp's perspective, what's the work ahead here now for philanthropy in general? How can big philanthropy get out of little philanthropy's way, if you will, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it, again, has to do with collaboration. The more that just across the philanthropic space, you have focus on being as direct as possible with getting funds out the door and being as, well, say, streamlined as possible with things like grant reporting and grant requirements. But that's the direction to go in. I think it's like no secret. The larger an organization is, there's the more bureaucracy, the more et cetera, the more layers there are, and that's just kind of goes with everything. With that being the case, then I think the important part is making sure that as an organization, you are hiring people that are as diverse as you claim your mission is. So if you're an organization that is focused on, like, I don't know, like we're giving out grants to Africa, Africa as a continent, but you don't have anybody from the continent in the decision-making processes, then that's an issue. And notice I'm saying like decision-making processes. So it's not like, oh yeah, we've hired at the most entry level portions. Like, no, like up and down the spectrum. Do you have people as part of your organization who reflect the actual mission of that organization? I think that's always a gut check. And if you don't, then what is the path to get there?
Right. That's like the huge lever here. And I know that diversity inclusion practices are under attack or whatnot, but if we're just talking about like for good work, you're trying to bring resources to those who have been underserved, repressed, oppressed, but you don't have lived experience at the decision-making level. Like, how do you know how to deploy those resources in the most effective way? Also, like, from the decision-maker standpoint, like, maybe all these things that we're putting up as barriers need to be removed rapidly so that we can get this funding out. But how would you know that from the other side if you don't actually have lived experience?
It all becomes academic at that point. It all becomes theory.
Totally.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. This is going back to my time with diplomacy, just like rounding out my experience. So when I started in Eritrea, and I had this thing like, oh, I'm going to talk about what I know about the Montgomery bus boycotts, and I'll teach Sudanese people. Fast forward several years later to my time actually serving in South Sudan, just before and then during the onset of the civil war that broke out. And so one of the things that we did, we reached out to different youth leaders that we had contact with. But this time I approached it differently. I was like, look, this can't be me like bringing them together and giving people advice, because what do I know about being in like an actual war zone where people are targeted and atrocities are happening? So instead, we flew them all to Nairobi. And Nairobi was important because at the time, this was the end of 2013, early 2014. So this was a few years after Kenya had its own series of there was some election unrest, some student-led unrest that happened for a while. Like if you go back to the news cycles, like it was a very big thing. So we flew them to Nairobi and lined them up to basically be able to learn from Kenyan activists, as well as we brought in Semhar Araya, who is an Eritrean activist who's been very big on working with just the diaspora in general. And instead of me being like, hey guys, here's some strategies you can use, these are people with real lived experiences, like who are actual activists in the region. Just, if you're looking at the map where South Sudan is and its geographic neighbors who are also politically, attached in the region. And these became like sort of very real discussions. At one time, when one of the activists said, listen, this is going to be a long-term thing. There is no short-term solution. So whatever you go back home and start to think about doing, know that it's not an easy or a quick thing. So there's just a lot of good information. And so for me, my role just became facilitating these resources as opposed to me trying to impart what I would have thought was wisdom, etc. And I think that type of approach is the type of thing that you would need in terms of philanthropy and how philanthropy should operate. Look for areas where you can step back and facilitate connections, facilitate opportunities, facilitate abilities for movement leaders, community leaders, and so forth to be able to get the work done, as opposed to structures where you're sort of explaining things to them.
It's brilliant, right? You're an American on foreign soil. You are there to ensure that you are, being in a diplomatic function. And instead of imparting advice that you don't have the means to impart, you're just like, you are all seeking liberation. You're all seeking freedom, bringing you together so that you can share information and resources and build towards that. As an example of, obviously in the first world scenario here in the States, like, big philanthropy should be doing all of that versus these funnel, top-down kind of money imparting kind of processes, right? Like, what's going on here? We have resources. How do we pull you all together so that you can build and lead us? We don't need to lead you. I think that's another big problem with big philanthropy. We're leading you with our agenda more so than we're listening to you, or we're listening to everybody, 3 or 4 years ago and setting up next year's agenda for this. And I feel like there's sometimes it's just out of touch. And it's not like a malintended, they're trying to hear and support, but like, send the money to the folks that are on the ground doing the work, that are working from pain towards peace, that are working from suffering towards solutions. They know what to do. Let them lead. Send the money, right?
Exactly.
I just like, it's a tough one. All right. The thing about this pod and the work that I do is like I deeply believe in nonprofit work, especially fiscal sponsorship work, because it's small philanthropy at its best. It gets real people doing real work regardless of where they're coming from. What are you seeing from your projects that work with Build Up Inc.? Like, what are some of the major challenges that they're facing? How do you help them solve those challenges? Or maybe you can share some of the, the highlights that are coming together in the work that you support.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a few things. It's a variety. One, across the board, fundraising is always a challenging issue. And so, and also important to note that as a fiscal sponsor, and most fiscal sponsors, we don't do fundraising for our projects, but we do work as closely as we can on helping them to get grants together, helping them find grants, that sort of thing. So, we're seeing fundraising as a challenge, especially now. I think just a lot of funding sources have become harder to reach, and I think that's just part of how things have been going in 2025. But I think we're also seeing, just in general, organizations saying, like, well, how do we get started on certain things? Like, how do we how do we get moving? Like, how do we organize the logistics of things? So, like, for example, we had one organization, Lioness GWA. GWA stands for Justice Impacted Women's Alliance. So this is actually a group of women in Texas focused on advocating for girls and women in the justice system, who are incarcerated and so forth. And one of the things that they came to us about was just how do we build our advisory board? So an advisory board being different from a board of directors, where it's their goal is in the name, like to provide strategic advice to the organization. And so, things like that, or, how do we better structure our, contracts with vendors? There's a lot of that sort of these infrastructural questions from organizations that are starting out. And I'll say Lioness Jiwa, since then, they've been able to grow and spin off to become their own 501c3, which is
fantastic.
It's a fantastic thing. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
Our hope for all of our projects who want that, So yeah, I would say like infrastructural questions is definitely something that we're continuing to see.
And I think the spinoff is part of the highlights part of this work. And, just for folks who are considering starting a nonprofit or becoming a fiscally sponsored project so they can start work, what Ajani just shared was, the board of directors, that's actually at the nonprofit org level. It's attached to the EIN. They're fiduciarily responsible for the organization and its work, including your project, right? But at a project level, you should be supported in bringing together an advisory board around your area of work that can support you in that, right? And if you spin off or roll off, sometimes it's called, and create your own 501c3, often that advisory board is the first to be looked at to become your board of directors.
Exactly, because they have the experience.
Right.
They've already been doing some of the work. That's precisely it.
Yeah. And for those who are kind of still new to the idea of being a sponsored project, some folks choose to stay with their fiscal sponsor and can grow very large projects there. And some folks choose to exit and take on all of the other work behind the scenes. It really just depends on who you are, where you are, and what you want. From a efficiency standpoint, it's much easier to share costs with a sponsor than to hire an accountant, a bookkeeper, an operations person, a legal counsel, all the back office work when you're getting started. Right. And sometimes you get so large or you're growing fast enough where you can take that on, and maybe the, direct embedding of that inside your project as a now nonprofit makes more sense, right? So it's not an either or, it's a decision that you come to as you go forward in this work. Most fiscal sponsors, if not all, really do encourage you to spin off and become your own 501c3 if that's what you want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one thing we tell our projects is that it's always an evolving decision. Sometimes, when there or potential projects are talking to us, they want to know sort of like what's the timeline, how long do projects stay with us, and we say it always depends. Not just on the project's growth, but just what their goals are, how they're building. Just like you said, some projects will find that it's easier, it just makes more sense for that back office support to continue to be provided by the fiscal sponsor. And then you can get into like even more complicated scenarios. You can have Model C arrangements where the project has its own entity, like an LLC or a corporation, that possibly even does for-profit work. But then they have a nonprofit division, so to speak, but they don't want to also set up a 501c3. So instead, they'll go to a fiscal sponsor to sort of manage the grants and funds that come in. So there's lots of flexibility, and I think that's one of the important things about fiscal sponsorship is that it's meant to be this flexible tool for individuals and organizations that are looking to get the work done and want to be able to do so in an efficient process.
Ajani just talked about models, and models can be discussed another time, but it's the different ways you can be in relationship with your nonprofit that you're working with, your fiscal sponsor. Adler Colvin put the book together, 6 Ways to Do Fiscal Sponsorship Right. I'll put it in the link. When I became a Model C project 15 years ago, we sat around a little table in a conference room at a local nonprofit in the city, and we literally pulled that book out and read through it and decided, how to engage. So it's very important thinking. Ajani, give us some positive. Let's wrap here on some the positive messaging, optimism. It's important to be measured and understand this is hard work. These are hard times for all of us. what do you see as kind of the optimism, not toxic in a toxic way, but like
Sure.
what keeps you grounded? What keeps you going?
So the first thing that comes to mind, and I think listeners are going to think that this is like free advertisement here, but honestly, it's people like you. And I say that because when I look at,
I did not pay him for this.
yeah, I know, but here's where I'm going with this. When I look at like the startup space, right? And I mentioned like very briefly, I had a startup for a while where one of the things that we were looking at were startups on the African continent. For a while, I was kind of deeply immersed in the venture capital and that kind of thing. So when you look at startups, a lot of, especially in the U.S., a lot of them are not creating things that people need. They're creating things that they say is filling a niche or a gap or whatever, but they're either like reinventing the wheel or like they're creating something that they like knowingly just want to like build fast and far and like sell it, make a bunch of money, and that's it. And like but then when I look at the work that you're doing and just being very focused and very intentional on like, well, what can we do with nonprofits that are that are engaged in doing the work, and what are the services that we can provide that will be helpful to them getting the work done? And so I'm talking about the Maslow platform, which is something that Build Up Inc. uses to help provide financial management for our sponsored projects. But just when I see that type of intentionality, and I think for like outsiders looking in, it's kind of boring, but like some of the most important stuff is boring.
That's right. It's compliance driven, right? It's audit ready. Yeah, that's boring.
Yeah,
that's boring.
Yeah,
but that matters.
These words. Yeah, nobody cares about these words. But it's
so
like
true.
It's super important, and when I see that type of intentionality, it lets me know that like there are people out there that are staying focused. I mean, like other things that make me very optimistic. Again, I talk about the African Philanthropy Conference and just the hundreds of people there who are all super focused on this idea of decolonizing philanthropy and working towards those endeavors. I'm driven every time just I see people with book recommendations, just things like that. Just reminding people like, hey, like don't forget to read. Have you tried this author? Have you looked into that? So little things like that I think help to keep me grounded.
I appreciate that. Yeah, there's a lot of like existential fear out there, but at the end of the day, we're all just trying to make this world better, move it forward, and care for each other. And purpose matters. I appreciate the shout out on Maslow. I mean, it's deeply purposeful tech. It's not sexy at all, but it helps folks do good. And so thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, if folks are interested in learning more about Ajani's work, about the Campbell Law Firm's work, about Build Up Inc., we'll put it in the notes here. Stellar group of human beings doing stellar work. Ajani, thank you so much for making the time. Appreciate you.
Kian, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.